Hey guys, what's going on? I'm here to go over the Module 9 homework assignments that we turned in yesterday, Wednesday. So let's get right after it. We'll start off with this one first. This was a homework assignment that I inherited from the previous teacher. It was in the file cabinet, and I thought it was really awesome. But it wasn't a digital copy. It was just one of those old school, like, hey, here's the copy, put it in the copy machine. So I retyped it, and of course, when I retype things, you know me, and make errors. So number 3 is going to have an error in it. It's not going to make any sense. You probably looked at it and went, what the heck? But I'll clarify that, and we'll move on. And the other thing that was neat, I thought at the very bottom, was that the teacher had said RBLL and ISRR. And I didn't know what that meant. I kind of looked at it and went, what the heck does that abbreviation mean? And I kind of went over it, and in my brain, then I realized, oh, cool, that's a pretty cool acronym for monetary policy. So I wrote it out, and usually when I hand this assignment out in class, I always highlight this at the beginning as like your cheat sheet. But didn't remember to do that when I was making the video with you guys, and I wasn't there in class to see it and remind myself, so my bad. RBLL, that's going to be our expansionary monetary policy, or we can call it a loose monetary policy. Um, so R means reduce interest rates because that's the point of monetary policy. If you want to be expansionary, you want to reduce the interest rates. So to reduce them, what are your options? You can buy bonds and lower the reserve requirement, or you can lower the discount rate. So expansionary monetary policy or a loose monetary policy. And when you say loose, it's like you're loose with your money, you're giving it out, you're getting crazy. And then ISRR would be a contractionary monetary policy or tight monetary policy. Like if you're being tight with your money, like you're broke, I'm tight. I'm going to hold it in. I'm going to lock it in. So ISRR, increase the interest rate. To do that, you sell bonds, you raise the reserve requirement, and you raise the discount rate. Cool. So that was my note. Oh, that's where I saw them. I'm like, wait, what the deuce? So when I saw this on the activity, I was like, what the heck? And then after some soul searching, I came across what it actually meant. So let's get to these. So the first one, our problem is inflation. If we have inflation, then we are to the right of our long run aggregate supply. AS, AD, our QE is greater than our QY. So QE is greater than QY. We want them to be equal. We want to bring this back. So we need to do a contractionary monetary policy. When we do a contractionary monetary policy, our goal is to raise the interest rates. So using that acronym we already know, if we want to do a tight monetary policy, we want to increase the interest rate, well, what can we do? We can sell bonds, we can raise the reserve requirement, and we can raise the discount rate. So on the top up here, if there's inflation, we want to increase the reserve requirement ratio. That means banks would have more in their required reserve and less in their excess reserves. And since there's less in their excess reserve, there it is, there's less in their excess reserves, then they can't loan out as much, and the money multiplier is smaller. You want to raise the discount rate, because if you raise the discount rate, then the penalty of loaning out too much money and having to borrow from the Fed is going to be high. If you have a large punishment or a large penalty, you are going to be prevented, or not prevented, it's going to, what's the word I'm looking for? It's going to, I guess, you're not going to want to do it. I can't find the word on my head. Like say, for example, if there's a large punishment, your curfew at night is 12 o'clock, but you know that if you're late, you're going to have a 15-minute grounding in your bedroom the next day. You're going to be like, whatever, coming home at 1. But if the punishment is really harsh, like you'll be grounded for a week, no phone, no computer, no Netflix, no nothing, then you're like, oh, snap, I'll be home on time. So if you raise the discount rate and you raise the penalty for overloaning, then it's going to decrease banks' willingness. There's my word to loan out money. And then finally, open market operations, you would sell bonds. And why sell bonds? Because the Fed is going to take that bond. Still have it. Didn't clean my desk yet. They're going to take that bond. I still got the cash too. It's sweet. Probably the best way I can save money. They're going to have this bond. Bank's going to have this cash, and the bank is going to give the money to the Fed. So it's out of the excess reserves. They now have a bond that gives them interest, but this money doesn't get loaned out to people, and it doesn't get multiplied thereon in the economy. So selling bonds would increase interest rate. And then everything here would just be the opposite. If we are in a recession, we're experiencing high unemployment, long run aggregate supply, AS, AD, QE, QY. Over here, my QY is greater than my QE. I'm not producing as much output as I should, so I'm in a recession. I'm having high unemployment. I need to get aggregate demand back over here, back up to equilibrium. So what do I want to do? I want to drop those interest rates. That way people take out loans, businesses take out loans, and we spend it. So what's my option? It's going to be to buy bonds. Let's lower the reserve requirement, because now if the reserve requirement was big, that means you don't have as much excess reserves. You shrink the required reserves, which means you increase the excess reserves, and this money right here can go out and be loaned out to people and multiplied in the economy. So lower the reserve requirement and lower that penalty, the discount rate for over loaning. So that's right there. All right, let's get to number one. Number one, given a reserve ratio of 10% and deposits of 60 million, how many dollars would the bank be required to keep in reserves? And how much money would it have in excess reserves? So you're like, this kind of seems like a bank balance sheet question, Mr. Owen. Yeah, kind of, but just trying to clarify it out there. So 60 million times 0.1. So this bank, if you've got 60 million in deposits, you're going to have to keep 6 million in required reserves, and you're going to have 54 million in your excess reserves. This excess reserves are your initial new loans that can be turned into new money when they make that loan. Alrighty. Number two, let's see. What is the effect on banks and the money supply when the Fed lowers the reserve requirement ratio? Explain. All right, when the Fed lowers the reserve requirement ratio, that means there's more excess reserves available to become new loans, and they're going to loan it out. The second part of this is with a lower reserve requirement, it's going to grow the multiplier. Because if we remember, our money multiplier is 1 over a required reserve. So if we have a money multiplier of 0.2, that means our money multiplier is 5. But if the Fed decides to drop the required reserve to 10%, then our money multiplier is 10. So whenever you decrease the required reserve ratio, what you're doing is increasing excess reserves that can become new loans, and work on my hand placement there, and you're growing the money multiplier. Sweet. All right, let's flip it. That takes us to number 3. All right, number 3. If the Fed were to decrease the discount rate, would people be more or less likely to borrow money for new cars? Well, that doesn't make any sense because people don't care about the discount rate. So what the question should have said would be something along the lines of, if the Fed were to decrease the discount rate, would banks be more or less likely to loan out money to people to buy new cars? And the answer would be more likely. If the Fed decreases the discount rate, then banks would be more inclined to make loans to people wanting to buy cars. Why? Because the discount rate is the penalty that you have to pay the Fed if you loan out more money, more excess reserves than you have. You dip into your required reserves. So this question in itself doesn't make any sense because people don't care. It has to relate to banks. I made the correction, left it on the school computer, and I boneheadedly just uploaded this document without reviewing it. All right, number 4. Let's turn that 3 into a 4. Sweet. How is the economy affected when people buy savings bonds, and why? Now, I came up with this question because it's a trick. When we have thought about expansionary monetary policy, we talk about everything from the Fed. When the Fed buys bonds, what are they doing? The Fed is buying a bond from a bank. So if this bank has demand deposits of $100, they have required reserves, let's say $10, they have excess reserves of $50, and then they've got bonds sitting around that equal 40. So clearly this is a 10% requirement reserve example here. Now if the Fed buys bonds, they're going to give this bank $40 for those bonds. This becomes 90 right here, and they're increasing the amount of initial new loans that the bank can make. But this question is not talking about the Fed buying bonds. They're talking about people buying bonds. So if a person buys a bond, it's going to have the opposite effect. When a person buys a bond, it's going to decrease the money supply. Why? Because they're not putting their money in the bank, they're buying a bond. And that bond is getting locked up because that money goes to the Fed. That Fed can either delete it, they could shred it, they could do whatever they want with it, but that money's not going into the banking system. So in essence, the economy has less money available. When I saw this question on AP exam, they said a series of local banks buy bonds from the Fed. And I was like, ooh, and of course, I mean, I immediately went to my acronym, buy big, and then I got it wrong. So this is a trick question that floats around out there. Just make sure you identify that when it's not the Fed buying a bond, you have to think about where is the money going. All right, number 5. In the margin, graph equilibrium in the money market. Remember to label everything. Now increase the money supply and label it MS2. All right, so this is number 5. Put a 5 right there. So our money market, we're using our interest rate. This is nominal interest rate. And then our quantity of money down here. This is our money demand curve and our money supply curve. And they said increase the money supply. So if our initial quantity was at equilibrium, and just to complete my labeling, this would be interest rate at equilibrium. If I'm increasing the money supply, I'm going to call it quantity 1. Is that what they told me to label it? Oh, nope. They didn't tell us what to label it, just to label MS2 as MS2. What is the effect on interest rates? So let's track the intersection between our money demand curve and our money supply curve. Looks like our interest rates have dropped. Okay. Why would the Fed increase the money supply? The Fed is increasing the money supply because we must be in a recession. And by increasing the money supply, dropping the interest rates, if you decrease the interest rates, both consumers and business, C and I in our equation, are going to take out loans and they're going to go out there and spend it. So a consumer is going to take out a loan for a big ticket item like a car or a house. Business is going to invest in capital stock. They are going to grow aggregate demand. So aggregate demand would shift to the left. If we were initially in a recession, now we have moved over to equilibrium. How will this affect the economy? That's what I did right there. Boom. Aggregate demand would increase. Our price level would go up. Our output would return to our long run equilibrium, and we are all good. All right. Let's take a look at this matching sheet. This one, again, something I found from the previous teacher, and I thought it was really cool. When I look at this one, it's nice to have that acronym right there. I hear a crying baby, but I'm looking at the baby cameras and I don't see anything. Must be my neighbor's baby. Haha, sucker. So let's get at this one. So the directions were just draw a line to them. So if the Fed raises the requirement, raises the reserve ratio, well, that is going to be a tight monetary policy. I'm tying it over here, and this would be to decrease the money supply. If the Fed buys government securities, it's going to be increasing the money supply because it's adding to excess reserves of each one of the banks, and that's to increase the money supply. If the Fed lowers the required reserve ratio, if they lower the required reserve ratio, it's increasing the excess reserves. That's going to increase the money supply, and that's part of our loose monetary policy. I'd be drawing that line right over there. If the Fed raises the discount rate, well, that's raising the penalty for making excess loans. So that's going to deter. There's another good word I could have used. It's going to deter banks from loaning out money. So it's going to decrease the money supply. That'll be a tight monetary policy. And then if the Fed sells government securities, well, when they sell those government securities, banks are paying for them out of their excess reserves and their balance sheets. And so that money is not going out into the economy. So they are decreasing the money supply. And that's a tight monetary policy. If the Fed lowers the discount rate, they're lowering the penalty for making loans. So if you lower the penalty for making loans, then banks are going to be more likely to make loans or be a little bit more risky with their excess reserves. That's to increase the money supply, and that would link us to a loose monetary policy. All right, and critically thinking. Which type of monetary policy would the Fed use if the nation's unemployment rate were 10%? Oh, good question. All right, so if we think about it, if our nation's unemployment rate was 10%, and our natural rate of unemployment is always 4 to 6%, I'd draw it out in a Phillips curve. I'd say inflation, unemployment. My long-run Phillips curve is always going to sit at my NRU, my natural rate of unemployment of 4 to 6% or 5. Currently, this economy is sitting right there. Let's make this the economy of Owenland. Hello. So I'm in a recession. If I put this in an ASAD graph, I got my price level. I got my big head covering up the graph. I'm going to bring that guy back over there. I got price. I really put a price level, real GDP, long run aggregate supply, AS, AD, QE is less than QY. I'm in a recession. So which type of monetary policy would I want to employ if my unemployment rate was 10%? I'm here or here. I want to get myself an expansionary monetary policy. I want loose monetary policy. So what are my options? Buy bonds. Oh, there you are. Buy bonds, lower the reserve requirement, lower the discount rate. Next one. Given a reserve requirement ratio of 25%, let's flip the page. Beep. Let's give this one a balloon and a little child holding a balloon. Hello, I'm a child holding a giant balloon. It's gonna blow away. Let's see. Given a reserve requirement ratio of 25%, what would the money multiplier be? All right. So we know that our money multiplier is 1 over the reserve requirement ratio. So in this case, 1 over 0.25. My money multiplier is 4. Okay. The maximum amount of money potentially created if there is a deposit into a financial institution of $1,500. Okay, so if $1,500 goes into this bank, they're going to have to hold on to some of it in required reserve, and the rest of it can go into excess reserves. So in this case, 1500 times 0.25 0.25. Looks like $375 has to sit in the required reserve, which means 1,125 becomes my initial new loans that the bank can make. Our equation for the maximum expansion of the money supply is going to be our initial new loans times our money multiplier. This is our maximum expansion. So my initial new loans, 1,125 times 4. $4,500 is the maximum amount of new money that could be potentially created if a bank was to receive $1,500, assuming 25% required reserve. All right. Hey, Fred. Hello. Number 3. If Fred deposits $5,000 into the booth and the reserve requirement ratio is 25%, wow, not even an ending of the sentence. This is a quality worksheet, Mr. Owen. If Fred deposits $5,000 into Bank of America and the reserve requirement ratio is 25%, what's the potential effect on the MON? All right, so it's a Jamaican problem. And I'm guessing I wanted to write money supply. So let's break it down the way we do it. 5,000 required reserve, excess reserve, that's just shameful. 5,000 times 0.25. Whoa, what the deuce? Oh, 5,000 times 0.25, 1250, which means 5,000 minus 1250. Excess is 3,500. And since it's 25%, we already know we solved for that up here. So it's times 4 again. So initial new loans, 3,750 times 4 is going to be the maximum effect on the money supply. So $150,000. Sweet. All right. So that was this assignment. Hopefully that was not too bad. Bring this guy over here. Let's give it a smiley face now. Hello, with smiley faces. All right. Let's break this one back. And unit 4, shifts in the money supply. All right. So changing the reserve requirement. What is the effect of increase? So basically, it's just a reinforcement of the last activity. What is the effect of decreasing the required reserve? If you decrease, let's write them out though. If you decrease the required reserve, so if the required reserve goes down, that means my excess reserve goes up and my money multiplier goes up. So we are increasing. Oh, hey, my head's in the way. So we're increasing our money supply. Number 2, what's the effect of increasing the reserve requirement? If we're increasing the reserve requirement, if we increase the reserve requirement, that means we'll have less excess reserve. We will have a smaller money multiplier, and we are decreasing our money supply. Number 3, in a recession, what should the Fed do to the reserve requirement ratio? We want to increase the money supply, so we want to decrease the required reserve. It'll increase our excess, higher money multiplier, interest rates are going to go down, people are going to take out loans, businesses are going to take out loans, aggregate demand goes to the right. If there's inflation, what should the Fed do to the required reserve? Well, if there's inflation, we need to raise that interest rate, so we increase the required reserve, we decrease excess reserves, we decrease the money multiplier, that decreases the money supply, interest rates go up, businesses say nah, consumers say nah, and aggregate demand shifts to the left. So just to get that on there, we want to increase required reserve, and aggregate demand will go to the left. All right, changing the discount rate. What is the effect of decreasing the discount rate? You decrease the discount rate, you decrease the penalty for making excess loans and dipping into your required reserves. If you decrease people's penalty, you're eliminating that deterrence. To use that word again, the deterrent, even better. You're taking that away. Banks are more likely to make more loans because when they go to the Fed and say, hey, whoops, I blew it, I got to take out a loan from you. If the penalty is smaller, then they're more likely to do it. So what's the effect of decreasing the discount rate? That is going to increase the money supply and move aggregate demand to the right. Number 6, what is the effect of increasing the discount rate? Banks don't like punishment. I don't like punishment. No one likes punishment. So it's going to decrease the money supply because they're not going to risk it. That means interest rates go up, consumers say, nee, businesses say, nee, and no one takes out loans, no one spends, aggregate demand shifts to the left. Cool. All right, the next one